What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Nutrition Tips with me, Tyson the Trainer. Today is a nutrition podcast, and we are talking about why you need to only worry about calories and protein, right? Now, of course, this is for those of you that are tracking. If you're not tracking, then, look, calories and protein are still important, but obviously, if you're not tracking, then, trying to have awareness of what you're eating, portion sizes, and that are going to be the most important thing for you, and trying to add protein in at every meal. However, I want to talk about why I only give protein and calorie recommendations, and why not worrying about your fucking macros. Why you shouldn't worry about your fucking macros, right? Basically, I'm just going to jump right into it, okay? I've got this written down, I've got a list, I'm going to tell you guys exactly why I think this, okay? So you're going to see, and you still do see, people talk about, all these coaches will give you a macro goal, your protein, carbs, and your fats. And they'll always usually give you within 5 grams of these macros. Now, firstly, people are doing this less and less, which is good to see. Now let's give you a macro range, right? Eat between this and this amount of protein, this amount of carbs, this amount of fats. And let me just kind of explain to you guys, firstly, if anyone has given you a macro target that's to eat within 5 grams of a macronutrient, and they promote flexible dieting to you, and you're following their plan, all right? And you're like, yeah, I felt like, this is what the fucking the flexible dieter jerk offs do. Yeah, I can follow flexible dieting, I get to kind of eat whatever you want. And then it gets to the end of the day, and they've got 21 protein, 6 carbs, and 2 fat. So it ends up being like fucking a chicken thigh with a tiny bit of barbecue sauce. And you're like, I thought you could flexible diet. Oh, yeah, but I've got to stay within these numbers. And it's like, is that flexible though? Like the fact that you have flexibility, quote unquote, flexibility. Do I even say quote unquote if I'm on this? Whatever. If you have flexibility, I'm doing air quotes here, but you stress out about going over your macros, and it's like, is that flexible? Like you're bragging to people because you're like, oh yeah, I get to eat whatever I want. And it's like, okay, but the fact that you get anxiety every fucking night or every day because you're playing macro Tetris to make sure it fits within your perfect carb, fat, protein goal, and you've got to be always on point. It's like, that sounds a little bit neurotic, doesn't it? But you're telling me it's flexible, is it? And if you don't get 0, 0, 0 in MyFitnessPal, where you've nailed everything, or you might have 2 grams over on your fat and 3 grams over on your carbs, it wasn't a successful day. That sounds like a fucking bit of an issue. Why don't we talk about that? Oh wait, you're a flexible dieter. You know it all, right? And coaches harp on this fucking bullshit that's flexible dieting. It is not. If you are having restraint to eat a certain amount of fucking carbs and fats within 5 grams, that is insane. You can't even track the differences within 5 grams, because guess what? Our tracking has errors. No matter how good you think you are at tracking, you are not going to be able to fucking nail everything, because guess what? They've done tests on dietitians, and dietitians have been out by nearly 40% with their tracking. So there you go. You're going to be out by a fair bit. Now, that's not to say you shouldn't be tracking. It's to say there's no fucking point in worrying about 5 or 10 grams of a macronutrient. Okay, that's the first thing. You're not going to know the difference in regards to accurately tracking. You're going to be wrong anyways, okay? Secondly, have you ever asked your coach why you have to eat within 5 grams of your macronutrients? Or let's say 10 or 15 grams. You ever asked them why? And what is the answer if you've asked them why? Oh, because they got no fucking answer. Because anyone with an understanding of nutrition and biochemistry knows how fats and carbs are used in the body. So I'm going to explain this to you guys so you can understand how fats and carbs are used in the body and why these macro ratios don't fucking matter at all, okay? So we use carbs and fats as fuel sources. These are both fuel sources, right? We use them both throughout our day. And the way we are going to be using these is based on a few things. It's based on the meal you eat prior, like basically prior to exercise or in general. If you're having a diet that's always quite higher in carbohydrates, you're usually going to be using a little more carbohydrates. If it's always a little bit higher in fat, you're usually going to be using your body's going to use the higher fat as fuel, okay? When we're doing low intensity stuff, with me sitting down, talking, with me walking, having coffee with a friend, doing when I say low intensity, just like nothing that's going to require you to do any heavy breathing, basically, you're using fat as a fuel source, okay? Now, when I say fat as a fuel source, that is not body fat as a fuel source. It is the fat you have eaten, all right, being used as your fuel source. Now, there is also fat that goes in the bloodstream from our body fat if we're in a calorie deficit, but that doesn't mean that we're like, if you, you've heard the fat burning zone, it doesn't really fucking exist in regards to you're going to burn more body fat at this. Is what I'm trying to get across to you guys. So we use fat for a large majority of our day, I should say. When you're doing your 10,000 steps, you're using fat. When you're sitting in the office, you're using fat. When you're resting between sets at the gym, you're using fat as a fuel source, okay? The higher the intensity go, the more we start to use carbohydrates as a fuel source. So what I mean by this is when you are doing a set of 10, usually by, I'd say rep number 8, I'd say a set of 12 or 15. Usually by rep number 6 or 8, your heart rate is going up into a higher intensity heart rate zone, which will then use a little bit of carbohydrates. But then the heart rate drops back down, which means you're going to be using more fat as a fuel source again, okay? Because you are contracting muscle when you're also in the gym, you are going to be using the glycogen, the carbohydrates stored in your muscle, all right? So this is when we, again, different exercises, different activities are going to be using carbohydrates, and the higher the intensity will be. But so when there's contracting muscle, like which is doing weight training, running or endurance sports, any of those things, you will use carbohydrates as your fuel source. And as your heart rate increases, it's going to be more predominantly carbohydrates as a fuel source, okay? So they're both used as fuel sources. They're both used throughout our day, all right? Along with that, the brain uses glucose for a fuel source too, okay? So we have organs that also use fuel sources. They've got to be considerate of too. They both, our body is just going between carbs and fat use all the time, okay? There's not one predominant opposed to the other. Unless you are someone who is running, if you're an endurance athlete, then you are predominantly using carbohydrates as your main source of fuel compared to fats, all right? Like that's probably going to be the only difference. So I don't think anyone here is an extreme endurance athlete who's doing 2 hours plus training a day. If you are, again, you're the minority who's using carbohydrates as your fuel source. But everyone else, including the fucking bodybuilding bros who are doing their 10,000 steps on an incline treadmill, you're all using fat as a fuel source, between fat and carbohydrates as a fuel source. So if we're using both of these fuel sources during the day, why the fuck do you think it's going to matter what your macronutrient composition is going to be, okay? Some be like, oh, well, you need to get carbohydrates and you need a high carb diet because, you're going to be using your muscle glycogen when you're working out. Let me tell you right now, no one is depleting their muscle glycogen when they're working out. Unless you're 120 kilos plus, a huge bodybuilding male who will train for at least 90 to 120 minutes, then yeah, you might use some muscle glycogen. Everyone else, we're using muscle glycogen when we exercise. We're training for up to 90 minutes, okay? Let's say we're training for 90 minutes. And let's say you're doing 15 sets. Each set is going to take you between, let's say, 50 to 80 seconds. So let's just say a minute 10 max, and you're doing 15 sets, right? Is that what I said? Yeah. So out of all that, you're basically doing 18 minutes of work, if I calculated that correctly. 18 minutes, give or take, of actual work. And the rest of the time, your heart rate isn't in a zone where you're burning glycogen. So you think 18 minutes of actual work within that 90 minutes is going to fucking deplete your muscle glycogen? Or that you need to refill your carbohydrates? No, not a fucking chance. All right? Or again, we think we're burning so many calories doing weights. We're not. If you're doing CrossFit, you're going to burn more muscle glycogen, or doing F45, you're going to burn more muscle glycogen than just doing basic weight training. But does that mean you need to be eating more carbs than fats, high carb, low fat diet? No. These both are fuel sources that you want to be using and you will be using throughout the day, because think about how long you're exercising for. Let's say you're exercising for 90 minutes. Again, how long are you awake for? 16 hours a day, 17 hours a day, let's say, if you're sleeping 7 hours. You're awake 17 hours a day. Take away 90 minutes, let's say 2 hours. Let's say you just take away 2 hours. You've got 15 hours the rest of your day. You think you're using carbohydrates as a fuel source all the time? No, we're not, all right? And these both play an important part, not just for fuel, but things in our body that, they both, fats and carbohydrates are both used for certain things within our body too, okay? It's like fats. Good for hormone health, cellular membranes, nutrient transport, like these important things, especially like obviously hormone health. Then we have carbohydrates, and they're like, they play multiple parts in our body. So it's like they act as an energy source, like I said. They help control blood glucose and metabolism. Sorry, and insulin metabolism. They participate in cholesterol and triglyceride metabolism too. And then they also help fermentation. So, and also brain health, like because they're fuel to the brain, not just fuel for the body in regards to exercise. So carbohydrates and fats play a role, and they're both important macronutrients in our body. This is the thing that I'm like, why are we trying to pick or choose how much fats, how much carbohydrates we need? Then we see that people talk about you should ideally have lower fats and more carbohydrates because carbohydrates are anabolic and fats are easier to store as body fat. That is true if you are eating in a calorie surplus basically that's it. If you're eating in a calorie surplus. But guess what? If you're eating in a calorie surplus and you're going 600 calories over, right, in a calorie surplus, whether you're having predominantly carbohydrates or fat, you're still going to gain excess body fat regardless. So when you look at the grand scheme of things, people are like, oh yeah, eat more. Like I was this guy, eat more carbs because they're more anabolic, not as much fat. It's like, because we're trying to ratio the muscle gain. It's like, when you look at the fucking research, there's actually not a huge body of research showing that like the massive differences between having a bit more fat and a bit more carbohydrates in a surplus. There's fucking hardly anything, right? Like yes, fat from a dietary fat is stored easier in body fat, but it's not going to be a night and day difference in regards to if you gained, let's say 5 kilos in a muscle gain phase, all right? And one person did higher carbohydrates and one person had higher fats. The fat ratio from them isn't going to be insanely different. It might be a fucking few percentage points, if that. Yet people get pedantic about this shit. And then we've got to go back and think, oh, hang on. You guys, and I'm assuming you guys, including myself, who gives a shit about the pedantics? Like, why the fuck do you want to focus on, literally, it's like the 1 or 2% things. If you're not going to step on stage, if you're not going to compete, if you're not so fucking self-obsessed with being able to get every little thing you can out of your hobby called fucking the gym, then you don't need to worry about this shit. It's honestly not even fucking worth fussing about your macronutrients, which is why I say to everyone, have a balance. Make sure you get some fats in, make sure you get some carbohydrates in. Should you go low fat, low carb? Who gives a fuck? Why can't you just go like across the board, like 30, 30, 30 roughly, based on wherever your protein's going to be. But it's like, that's a fine balance. What if it's 30, 20, 40? Oh my God, who cares? Do what your personal preference is. Because what you've also got to consider is some people get satiated from higher fat intake. Some people get satiated from higher carbohydrate intake. You need to know who you are and what satiates you more. Because especially when you're trying to maintain a healthy body weight and trying to lose weight, if you know what satiates you more, then you're going to be having a higher chance of staying on track. Like if I told you, nah, you should be having low fat, high carb. And you're like, I can't, man. I'm fucking hungry all the time. Carbs don't fill me up. And I'm like, oh, well, do you want to be optimal? Do you want to do your best? And you're like, well, I'm fucking going to eat my arm off. And you're like, okay. Let alone, I'm like, that's what perfect is. Or I'm like, okay, maybe you should have a higher fat diet if that's going to keep you on track. And then the effort is less. It's easier. It's more enjoyable. You can cook foods that are higher in fat because you know how to cook foods. Fucking sweet. Like, do you want adherence or do you want perfection? Is, I guess, my question. Like, my question for you guys, but also for coaches listening. Do you want your client to fucking stick to the plan or do you want your client to be struggling and complaining? So don't give people these fucking stupid ratios. And then another thing that I used to bring up for myself, and then people argue with me about, is like, oh, well, if you just tell people just protein and calories, well, good luck with their hormone health with having low fat. And like, because I used to say this, and I'm like, what a fucking dumb response. Good luck with low fat. Who in the fuck eats low fat? Like, I dare you to try and eat as minimal fat as you can and make your diet enjoyable. It's not fucking enjoyable, all right? It's the same thing when you're in a gaining phase and you try and do low fat and high carbohydrates. Good luck eating a lot of fucking bland rice or a lot of bland chicken breast and things like that. Because you're like, oh no, I'm doing the low fat thing. Like, why in the fuck, man? Do you want to have something enjoyable or not? Because guess what? When there's fat, there's flavor, all right? Angie loves saying that because she heard it once on like this cookie show. And then every time there's like a fatty food that she loves, she's like, where there's fat, there's flavor. I'm like, I know. But, it's true. Like, where there is fat, there is flavor. Chicken thighs taste better than chicken breasts, right? Actual peanut butter tastes better than powdered peanut butter. Full cream milk tastes better than skim milk. Full fat yogurt doesn't taste as good as high protein yogurt. I will give YoPro and Chobani that, okay? But in general, fat is gonna just make food more enjoyable. And having a little bit of fat from olive oil, your monounsaturated fats, again, your peanut butter, for everyone that fucking, I don't get it. Why is every single, going back to this bodybuilding side of things, it's like their only fat source is peanut butter. This is actually something you guys should pay attention to. Watch these people's stories, the competitors, and just like watch what they eat when it comes to their food quality, because most of it's fucking trash, let's be real. But like, look at where they get their fat sources from. It's like, God forbid you add a little bit of extra olive oil into your chicken stir fry to make it tastier. Or God forbid you add a little bit of olive oil for some good monounsaturated fats. Or fucking avocado. Or some fatty fish. Now, I understand the fatty fish because it's quite expensive, right? But still, like, we're looking at this here. Yeah, you'll see them fucking use the peanut butter. It's like peanut butter, or Biscoff. It's like, do you understand? There are so many other good fucking fat sources you could be getting your fats from, like eggs, again, nuts, seeds, fatty cuts of, if you want, like, again, a chicken thigh is more enjoyable. Yet people are like, no, the peanut butter and the Biscoff, and it's like, broaden your fucking ranges here, people. Jesus, like, eggs are lit. I don't like. When I was overseas and I got to eat eggs every morning, I was like, fuck, every morning, I'm like, God, eggs are so good. And I want to have them back in my diet, Eggs, they're great. Again, monounsaturated fats from olive oil. Like, there's nothing wrong with making a dressing with a little bit of olive oil. Yes, it is calorie dense. I understand that. But you need to get your fats from somewhere, and just getting them just from fucking peanut butter himself so you can have dry, bland food for the rest of the time is just shit. Learn to add 5 mils or a teaspoon of olive oil into some food to make it better. Learn to have some eggs, because guess what? Eggs are very filling. You know what? Funnily enough, eggs are very filling for me. And they're more higher in fats. This frittata that we're making for my meal prep business, like, these are chonky boys. And they're so filling. And I'm like, because like, it's just a frittata on its own. There's no real carbohydrates there. There's just protein and fat. And I'm like, this is actually pretty fucking filling, just having this on its own, which has been good. So, why am I talking about this? Why did I forget this? Fat sources. Oh, with people complaining, people arguing the point where they're like, well, then good luck people having their hormone health when they're having low fat. Look, I don't think any of you guys listening are going to struggle to get your fats in. I honestly don't. I assume, again, if you are using peanut butter and stuff, or you do use a little bit of oil, or you get your fatty fish or some fish oil, I assume you're going to get a minimum intake of 0.6 grams per kilogram, which is pretty fucking easy to get, okay? So that argument where it's like, people won't get enough fats in, I thought that. And then I started giving clients no fat minimum goals. And then I was watching their nutrient intake. And surprise, surprise, no one seems to be eating under fucking 12 grams of fat a day. Because guess what? It's very hard to do. And your life is going to be miserable for it. So no one's going to struggle with not getting enough fats in. It's that simple. So with these ratios, they don't matter. Right? And the funny thing is, do you want to talk about flexible dieting? Flexible dieting, you have a calorie goal, a calorie range, I should say, because you should be using ranges like I've started talking about, and a protein range, and you get to use whatever else you want, however else you want it. Is one day going to be higher in carbohydrates because maybe you bake some extra potatoes, some extra rice, you accidentally overcook some, so you need to use that. But then tomorrow you boiled a fair few eggs, so now you're going to have some eggs for breakfast. So that way your fat's going to be higher on one day, your carbs are going to be higher on the other day. Is anything going to change? No. Is it going to affect your body composition that a lot of people like to talk about because of the macro ratio? You cannot tell a difference. Do you know why there's no studies comparing this? Because you don't need to fucking look at the studies to figure out if something is going to, carbohydrates versus fats is going to impact your body composition, because we know it doesn't. All right? We know it doesn't. There doesn't need to be studies on it, because the studies we've done calorie equations where, a calorie equation? Yeah, macro equations, where it's like this person's on a higher carb diet, this person's on a higher fat diet. When you look at the research and what people have lost weight, whoa, surprise, surprise, calories are the fucking biggest factor. With protein being a control, higher fats and higher carbs, either or, there are some people that enjoy the higher carbs, there are some people that enjoy the higher fats, they both lose body fat. Amazing. If you want to start getting into the 5 gram side of things, go and step on stage. Go and be a neurotic cunt. Go and obsess about all these little fucking things. But I'm assuming for those of you listening to me what I'm talking about, and I assume you agree with my point of view, is that the goal for you is that you want to look better, you want to feel better, you don't want to be fucking obsessed with food in the gym, you just want to be a bit of a hot cunt with being able to be healthy, right? I assume that, which means we go back to the good enough, and that's fucking protein and calories, all right? And that's it. And so if you have a coach that is telling you this now and you're like, oh, well, what do I do? I just heard Tyson talk about this. Ask your coach, be like, hey, can you just, ask them, what's the reason for it? See what they say. And then you can be like, okay, all right. Like, is there going to be a good enough answer that you're going to listen to? And what if you say to them, hey, I feel better on higher fat? See what they say. If you do actually feel better on it. Because I think a lot of them, they just tell you these things because they're just following other coaches online. Like, it's like no one has their own... No one's fucking educated on this shit anymore. It's like, oh yeah, you've done the course, but then you're not applying what you've learned on the course. You're just following what every other fucking influencer, the top people they see in their competitions, what they do, and it trickles down so they can do the same thing. And it's like, oh, there's actually no education here. It's just some fucking bro science going on. Because again, no one's like, oh man, if I dieted last year, and I wish I did 36% of carbs and only 22% of fats, and I know I would have come to stage a lot better. It's like, no, you fucking don't. Because you can't even measure that, firstly. Secondly, for those of you that want to obsess about it, again, they can go and do it. But if you're not going to worry about that shit, if your goal is not to step on stage and your goal is not dick skin lean, do not stress about macro composition, okay? I promise you, you're not going to lose any more muscle if you have lower carbs versus higher carbs, okay? You're not going to slow down your rate of weight loss because it's lower carbs versus lower fats, all right? None of that shit's going to happen. What you're going to figure out is what works for you that's going to make life way more fucking enjoyable, way more adherent, and that's who you want, right? I assume so. I assume you want things to be easier and not harder. I assume you don't want to be stressing about this bullshit all the time. So with that being said, stop fucking stressing about it. One thing I will mention though, your weight will fluctuate more because of this, okay? And what have I told you about the fucking scale? It doesn't matter. Why is your weight going to fluctuate? Because every gram of carbohydrates holds 3 grams of water, okay? Every gram of carbohydrates holds 3 grams of water. That means if one day you have 100 grams of carbohydrates more, you're going to hold 300 grams of water more. Now, a lot of people who just heard that are going to go, 300 grams of water? I'm going to hold more water? Fuck me dead. It's 300 grams of water. No one's going to look at you tomorrow and be like, you're more watery. You also got to consider your weight, all right? If you are a 60 kilo person, and you put on 300 grams of water, all right? You with me so far? You put on 300 grams of water. What percentage of your body weight is that? Think about how tall you are and where that percentage is going to be spread out. You're not even going to fucking fill up a bottle of 300 mils of water and look at that in that small bottle. Let's say it's a 600 ml bottle. It's halfway on a bottle, on a 600 ml bottle, okay? You with me so far? I hope so. Then look at yourself, who holds a lot more than 600 milliliters of water. You can't even fucking notice 300 milliliters, all right? So again, there's people that, oh, water retention, you don't even fucking notice it. Now, if you start to notice a lot of water retention, it's not because you're having more carbohydrates, okay? It's most likely because you're having more processed foods, higher in carbohydrates, higher in sodium, over consumption of food, which is causing the issue. Because if you're in a calorie deficit and you are fucking around with your carbohydrates on a daily basis, your weight will fluctuate, but your body composition will not. Because just because you've added more water, you're still in a calorie deficit and your body fat is going down regardless. okay? Where people start to look puffy, fluffy, bloated, all these things, is because you've eaten way above your calorie intake. That's when it becomes an issue. You know when this mostly happens? When people fucking pig out on foods that are highly processed, high, like I said, high in sodium, high in sugar, high in fat, pizza, burgers, all that shit. Because guess what? We never eat this shit in moderation. If we're gonna have a pizza, we're gonna have a fucking pizza. Like, I will smash one pizza. And if I woke up bloated the next morning, I wonder why I'm bloated. Is it the fucking gluten in the pizza, maybe? I don't think so. Is it maybe that I'm sensitive to wheat? No, it's because I ate fucking 8 slices of pizza. That's most likely going to be about 1,200 calories worth, which is then going to increase my overall calorie intake, which is going to be higher than what I usually should have, which is most likely going to be 3 or 4 times the amount of sodium that I'm used to. And also with that carbohydrate intake is probably going to be an extra 250 to 300 grams of carbohydrates, which will make me hold about 900 grams of water just from carbs. Then I add in sodium, and then I'm going to be bloated for a few days, all right? Just so we stop to fucking stress about the scale and the water retention. I hope that makes sense. And I hope this all gives you guys a better understanding that you don't need to fucking stress about your calories and about your macro ratios. No one's going to notice when they finish losing their weight, like, I wish I had a higher carb diet, I wish I had a higher fat diet. It doesn't fucking matter. You know what you're gonna wish? You're stuck to the thing that was easier for you, and that's all you're gonna wish. Because if it's easier for you, you're more adherent. And that is the podcast. Boom, done, finished, straight to the point, nailed it. Wanted to get to the end. Hope you guys enjoyed it as always. If you did, give this a share, and remember, just take a minute, give this a review so people can find it. Because again, I'm always happy to help give out free information, and all I ask for you to give back is just give this a quick review. Until next time, my friends, I'll speak to you then.